Doom afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to DNN, the Doomers News Network, where we do not cheerlead the financial system. We just tell it how it is because somebody has to. I am joined once again by my friends Travis and Melody are with us today, and we have a special guest will be joining us later today, and I'm going to turn it over to Travis. How are we doing today, buddy? He's over here.
I am doing well. I'm healthy. I'm not sick anymore. Wanted to give a good, big shout out to each and every one of you, the viewers that's joining us on a Sunday. Thank you guys so much. I will be doing a little bit different job when it comes to the comments. So I'm going to be a little bit more organized, but you guys continue to comment. We read pretty much every single comment. A lot of love out there, and there's a lot of critique out there. A lot of it's directed towards me. So to those people, I thank you for helping me to improve. That does mean a lot. This is a community. And so we have some really good stories today. First story, always by Jack this week in Dune. Second story, like Jack mentioned, is going to be by Kenny. He's going to go over and detail you guys the employment situation. There's Kenny right now. I see you, Kenny. Story 2 is going to be by Melody. Thank you for being here, Melody. Always a pleasure to see you. She's going to go over the DC affordable housing scam. A lot of bad things going on in the housing market. Next story is going to be by me, you guys. That's going to be the DOJ investigation on the rent price fixing. It blew my mind. Fifth story is going to be by Jack on the Argentine funny money story. So we got some funny money going on across the world. And then we're going to end with Melody talking about government-backed subprime. So we got a lot of stuff. Now, before I give it back to Jack, I wanted to give a quick shout out to both Jack and Melody. And, I want you guys both know I appreciate you. And I want to tell you and to the viewers real quick, I asked myself before I started, what's the biggest impact both Jack and Melody has had on me, other than our friendship, other than, being colleagues and allowing me to vent and cry to you guys all the time. You know what it was, guys? It's the same thing. It's the Federal Reserve. It's the Federal Reserve. And I want to explain this here in a minute, okay? You guys helped open my eyes to the Federal Reserve probably a year ago. And this is the point I want to make. It's taken me over a year, okay? About a year to walk down a path. It was a very painful path, very difficult path to walk down to finally really comprehend who the Federal Reserve really was and what the Federal Reserve was really doing to us as a country. So I thank you guys for that, but I do want to recognize it was painful. And it has taken me a long time, and I've been researching this a long time. And so I say that because I understand the division in our community, right? I understand these comments of the pettiness, and I just wanted to encourage everyone to remember, smile, show love, lead by example, serve some people. And that's it. Jack, the show is yours, sir.
Travis, real quick, brother, welcome to the righteous path. And I got to quote Pulp Fiction, who was quoting Ezekiel 25:17, the path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. And don't worry, I'm not going to shoot you at the end of that tirade like happened in Pulp Fiction, but I think that quote is appropriate considering that you have discovered the inherent evilness of the Federal Reserve and the central banking system as a whole. But I digress. It is time. Could we please share my screen, brother? Because it's time for This Week in Doom. And it was a particularly doomy week for data on the economy and in particular labor market data in the economy. But let's start with the Institute for Supply Management, who came out with the ISM Manufacturing PMI. That was first thing Tuesday morning on the short week. The ISM PMI for manufacturing came in at 47.2. That is up slightly from 46.8, but still anything below 50 is a decline in manufacturing activity. So that marks 21 out of the last 22 months where manufacturing activity in the United States has declined. New orders, production, backlogs, and employment all fell. But on the bright side, production costs rose at a faster rate. Oh, wait, that's not a bright side. That's actually kind of stagflationary, isn't it? Never mind, the whole ISM manufacturing PMI was just terrible once again. And then 2 days later on Thursday, we got the ISM services PMI, the other half of the economy. That was pretty much better than the manufacturing one. Came in at 51.5, up slightly from 51.4. So services activity is expanding ever so slightly. New orders and production rose. Employment rose just barely. That's after falling for 5 consecutive months. Backlogs fell sharply. And once again, the price gauge rose sharply. So both ISM PMIs are showing some inflationary pressure this week. Then on Wednesday, we got the JOLTS report, or the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. And job openings in the United States fell sharply by 237,000 to 7.673 million for the month of July. That's versus expectations of 8.1 million. So a big miss there by more than 500,000 job openings. Job openings in the United States have been in decline ever since the Fed began their tightening cycle in March of 2022. Then on Friday, we got the big data point for the week, the non-farm payrolls report, otherwise known as the jobs report. The U.S. economy added 142,000 jobs for the month of August. That is versus expectations of an addition of 160,000. So another big miss on the jobs report. But most notably, the jobs report from July was revised downward by 25,000 to just 89,000 from the initially reported 114,000. And you may recall that jobs report from July was enough to send the market into a tailspin, resulting in that big sell-off on Monday, August 5th. Well, that report got even worse. And then we've got June is saying, wait, hold my beer, because that one was revised lower by 61,000 to 118,000. So the combined downward revisions, 86,000 downward revisions to the two prior months. And when you subtract that from the 142,000 added, we had just a net addition of 56,000 jobs for the month of August. It was a terrible jobs report. Nonetheless, unemployment edged slightly lower to 4.2% from 4.3%, although the U6 unemployment rate edged higher to 7.9%. U6 captures people who are marginally attached to the workforce and people who are working part-time for economic reasons. Moving on to Thursday, we got news from OPEC that they announced they're going to delay the much anticipated oil production increase that was scheduled to happen next month. They were going to raise oil production by 180,000 barrels per day. They decided at the last minute to delay that by 2 months. And that is interesting because there has been significant oil supply disruption in the world in recent months. Almost 1 million barrels a day of production in Libya has been taken offline by a spat over who controls the central bank in that country. So even though we've had big time production shortfalls from other countries, OPEC is going to delay the production increase, and oil prices still close the week in the high 60s, down significantly once again this week. And so the global oil market is telling us here big time world recession is on the way, because despite this limited supply, prices just keep falling. And then we got news on Tuesday from NVIDIA that the company had been subpoenaed by the Department of Justice. And then, of course, a day later, NVIDIA denied that they had been subpoenaed by the DOJ. And so what happened, it seems it really boils down to an argument over a nuance. What NVIDIA really received was a civil investigative demand, which, although commonly referred to as a subpoena, is not technically a subpoena. And so if you want to be an imbecile or an a-hole and split hairs over definitions, no, NVIDIA wasn't subpoenaed. But I would add that failure to respond to a civil investigative demand is punishable under the law. So it's basically a subpoena. It was a silly story. The antitrust regulators are closing in on NVIDIA over anti-competitive business practices, aggressive pricing models that penalize people who don't agree to buy exclusively from NVIDIA, as well as questions around the acquisition of Israeli company Run AI. Then on Friday, we had California Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed a controversial bill that would have given $150,000 in California state government-backed loans to illegal immigrants for down payment assistance on buying a home. This bill had gotten a lot of attention nationally, and a lot of people were surprised by Newsom's veto. Now, he vetoed it citing budgetary pressures and that there wasn't enough money in the state budget to fund this, not something that has historically stopped California from doing much of anything. And people are saying the veto of this bill may indicate that Newsom still has presidential ambitions. And last but not least, we got this news. This was a big one this week. Russia Today employees, two Russia Today employees, Konstantin Kalishnikov and Elena Afantseva, something Russian that I can't pronounce, they were discovered in a DOJ indictment that they had funneled more than $10 million to a Tennessee company, Tenet Media, in order to pay right-wing influencers for content that appears to have been very favorable to Russian influencers, notably around coverage of the war in Ukraine. That money went to right-wing influencers such as Laura Southern, Tim Pool, Taylor Hansen, Matt Christensen, Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, and 6 others who are not named in the indictment. Although it's worth pointing out that in that indictment, none of those influencers were aware of the origins of the money. But still, you've got Russian state media, RT, is paying money to right-wing influencers in the United States in order to influence coverage of issues that will weigh on the presidential election. And of course, the FBI sent a strongly worded letter to the Russian government saying, hey, no meddling in our elections. That's our job. And such ends This Week in Doom. Back to you, Travis.
Okay, first question, real quick. Do y'all think, I didn't get no 10 million. Do y'all think that, like, those influencers knew about the corruption? Do you think that they were corrupt, or do you think that they were kind of just like innocent, kind of just sucked into the scheme?
I think they probably didn't know. The indictment actually specifically mentioned that influencer 1, 2, and 3. It didn't specifically say who they were. That 1, 2, and 3 were unaware of it. And of course, all of them have released statements since saying they had no idea where the money had come from. The media coverage is suggesting that these influencers are victims in this scam, or at least that's the language that's being used in the media.
And what do you think?
What do I think? It's tempting. People put money in front of you all the time when you're an influencer, right? I mean, I get offers all the time from Chinese companies, crypto pump and dumps, right? I mean, I turn them all down, but the temptation is there. People offer you millions of dollars to make content. The temptation is to take it. So, would I put it past them? No, but there's no evidence that says they knew where it was coming from.
And Melody, if you want to give him a question, and Kenny's here. I want to get Kenny on, but I want to get rid of these comments, not get rid of them, but there's some really good comments I want to throw up. But do you have anything back?
No, let's do it. Let's throw up some comments real quick.
All right. I'm going to throw up these comments, and I'm just going to blast these up here, and then you guys just kind of, chew them up, spit them out. From RRR, we always appreciate you. I see you all around YouTube, RR. I see you out there, man, on other people's channel. I may not say anything, but he says, friends don't let friends not know who the Federal Reserve is. You guys are my friends. Thank you for turning my life upside down and opening my eyes. That was nice. No, I'm kidding. That's step one. You got to be aware. But seriously, my gosh, man, it took me a year, Melody. I'm still not fully grasping the evilness there. But anyways, another good comment. Central banks behind Federal Reserve. Oh, Melody. And the bloodlines are behind the central banks. All about the bloodlines. You wanna comment on that, Melody? Because Central Park changed my life.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, let's keep going. Big shout out to Michael. I just did a podcast with Michael. I need to get Melody a coffee and a Mike mug.
Yes.
All the love for Melody. Me and Jack, you're second. I'm like the last one to get the love.
I got to put a note, like advertise here on the mug, man.
Right.
I got a dad mug. This is the best mug ever. So my kids.
That's cool. That's so cute.
Anyways.
And your kids are adorable. So
thank you. Yeah, I don't. Okay. All right. So from AG, you guys have been worried about inflation. I've been trying to tell you we are headed to a horrific deflationary depression. I thought that was a very strong comment. Not sure.
Can I take a second on this one?
Yeah,
That's an excellent comment, AG. And I agree. If nobody messes with anything, we will have a severely deflationary depression. If nobody messes with anything, that's a very big if. They never don't mess with it. So I do think you're right about that, but that requires the Fed to do nothing. And the Fed will blink the second things get tough. That's just my opinion there, but history supports that, I think.
Yeah. It's also history. And from Mud Sneakers, DNN will be covering the loss of the coming casinos in the coming years due to going cashless. I'm doomed. Michael responded to that. How will cashless lay off casino workers? People will still gamble. I hope not. I hope people will start saving, which usually happens during a recession. There's a massive $1 trillion black hole inside the federal budget. That's where the money is going. And not to mention unfunded liabilities. Not sure if you guys wanted to mention any of those comments, but if not, I'll bring Kenny in when you're ready.
yeah, I think we're ready. And Travis, somebody's saying my mic is a little hot. Is it sound okay now? Or
I think it sounds right now.
M&J. Okay.
Don't burn yourself on that hot mic, Melody.
Okay. Hey, Kenny, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Melody. How are you?
Awesome. So glad you have joined us again. So just a quick intro for Kenny Cat PhD on X Twitter is one of my good pals. We talk every day almost. And he does some great diving into the employment reports. He's a BI expert, and his graphs are amazing. And he gives a look into the employment situation that I really don't see anywhere else because he's diving into the bowels of the report. So we wanted to bring him on today to just talk a little bit about what he's seeing in the employment numbers, and how that might actually contradict what some people are saying out there. So welcome, Kenny, and let's roll.
Sounds good. Yeah. So, I mean, look, I'm just a guy who just so happens to work with databases like in, my everyday career. And so if people had access to this information and they were able to drill down into this labor data across both the two surveys that estimate jobs, people would have a much, in my opinion, different perspective as to what's actually happening. And so, quite frankly, that's kind of how I ended up on Twitter. Was I was just so annoyed by like all of these takes from mainstream media that are just narrative spin. That's what's happening, and it's just on steroids. So, I mean, we can get into some charts.
Let's do it.
If
you want to.
Works. So
Yeah.
let me just share my screen here. Okay. 1 second.
Yeah, some of these comments are absolute. They're lighting the Fed up right now. Literally lighting the Fed up.
By the way, thanks, Jock, for the super chat, by the way. Appreciate that, sir.
Okay, Kenny, got you.
All right,
Sure.
good.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm gonna just start kind of high level with the most recent numbers, and this information is from the establishment survey, otherwise known as what people here called non-farm payrolls. And this is just one of two estimates of jobs. The other one is the household survey, but this is the one that gets all of the attention, even though it doesn't even produce things like the unemployment rate, but that's a separate conversation. So look, this information it's the same thing. It's presented three different ways. So top left is the stock of jobs, and what they're like 150 million jobs. And then below that is just year over year percent, because obviously not every industry has the same number of jobs. And so what you're trying to do is just put that all in the same playing field. And so that's, of course, zoomed in real near term. So you can see, what the near term trend looks like, but also over a long time period. So you can get an idea as to the longer term trend. And then the main chart on the right, which includes the legend for all three, is just the year over year change in the stock of jobs. And so what you are clearly seeing, and again, this is kind of zoomed in. I have these zoom slicers on here. But what you're seeing is that jobs are just slowing. I mean, you need job growth for the unemployment rate to remain low. I mean, all this stuff moves with your population. If you don't have growth in jobs, but your population is growing, then you have all sorts of issues. And it'll eventually show up in the unemployment rate. But what I want to point out with this more than anything, and I'm not the first person to make this observation, is not only are jobs slowing, but you are not seeing broad-based participation across these different industries. So, for example, near-term government jobs, private education, and health services are accounting for the bulk of job growth. I mean, so that's that red, and I guess I could highlight that. There we go. Look how much growth you're seeing in those two sectors and how much it's accounting for job growth. That is pretty much a textbook recessionary trend. You can see it. Look, I mean, it's plain as day what's happening. So, and again, private education and health services, that's primarily healthcare jobs, just to be clear. But look, I'm not going to go into each one of these buckets because I could spend all day on them. I'm going to pick on just all things sort of related to real estate. So let me just jump over here real quick. And this is going to be, again, that same setup. You're going to look at it 3 different ways. Hang on. Jump over here first. So this is the construction bucket of employment. And usually people think of construction as just, I mean, like, it's just, they just show that as like one line oftentimes. And look, that doesn't tell me anything. I need to understand what rolls into that bucket of jobs. So this is sort of like the first cut of what construction jobs look like. And look, there's roughly, I want to say, just over 8 million construction jobs. And, you know, the big buckets are, you know, non-residential and residential specialty trade contractors, and then residential and non-residential building construction, and then heavy and civil engineering. I mean, from this vantage point, you're not seeing a whole heck of a lot of job slowing, at least near term. It's gradually slowing. And I guess my point would be, I mean, to me, that's logical if you look at just construction spending and how that's sort of skewed towards all the semiconductor and other related government sort of subsidized projects. And obviously we have a ton of multifamily construction ongoing right now too. So I wouldn't necessarily expect it to slow, just drop off a cliff dramatically. Because yes, it is different this time, but it's just really what the driver is. I mean, it just looks just a tad different, but the underlying trend of, you know, slowing demand is still there. So look, this is just one way of cutting it. But again, this is the same thing. It's the same thing. I just cut it differently. So what you're starting to see now is, oh, this is the thing that mainstream media probably doesn't want you to look into. So I look at this and I go, okay, what's the biggest bucket here? What should I look at? You know, what interests me from like a housing perspective? And I'm looking at building equipment contractors. You know, that's probably like what, 1/3 of jobs, and then residential building construction, just given the nature of that. But, you know, it doesn't make a distinction here between residential or non-residential. So, look, this is another way of looking at that information. And now we're just going to focus, we're going to remove heavy and civil engineering from it. This is another way of looking at that same information. So what I gather from this, and I'm not going to go into every single one, is that residential construction and all the specialty trade contractors associated with it is slowing. Is it dramatically slowing across the board? No. But I mean, for example, foundation and exterior contractors look like they're pretty much already in a recession. I mean, that's, you know, you're pretty much at zero growth or no growth. But now what if we get into like some of these contractor buckets? Yes, you can drill down farther than that. So what I take away from this, honestly, is there are a ton of freaking plumbers. Like, look at the growth in all these plumbers. But again, this is across both residential and non-residential. I don't think they cut it separately. That trend is just stupid, especially for plumbers and HVAC. I don't. That to me is right for a correction. And I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but you know, there just seems like there's a lot of froth there.
Hey, Kenny. Can I clarify something? The data that you're using, is this to May of 2024?
Oh, did that say May? No, so
Yeah.
these are the most recent numbers.
Okay.
And let me clarify real quick. So the all of my models, like all this stuff, is the most up to date. Through August. The deeper you get into some of these cuts of the labor data, it's going to lag by about 1 month. Typically, is how that works.
Okay.
So if I put May somewhere in there, I apologize. Probably just needed to update a label. So this is residential building construction. So the trend here I see is new housing for sale builders is contractionary. It bounced basically when BTFP was rolled out, as did a lot of these employment buckets. But I mean, golly, look at all these residential remodelers. They account for close to 50% of residential building construction jobs. So anyway, I know there's a lot of detail here, but I'm just trying to be as comprehensive as possible. So this is the foundation, structure, and building exterior contractors bucket. I mean, you're seeing significant contraction year over year. And a lot of this started pretty much at the end of 2023, some earlier than that, right? So, okay, building, finishing contractors, it's that same near-term trend, right? I mean, it's just slowing. It's just slowing all over the place. Now that's, as far as I'm going to go in the construction side of things, now let's jump over here real quick to something like professional, scientific, and technical. This is when you think of professional and business services, this is like one of the two big components of that bucket. The reason I want to show this is for this piece in particular, architecture, engineering, and related. It doesn't go further than that, but it gives you an idea. When you look through history, yes, it's slowing. Does it slow in a straight line? No. Right? I mean, it's at 2.6% year over year. But again, there's other ways of looking at this too, if we're focusing on housing. So this is just kind of a hodgepodge of different job buckets that, attribute to really housing. So floor covering retailers, furniture retailers, all of that stuff is in significant contraction, really has been since, beginning of 2023. This is picking up real estate agents and brokers as well as appraisers. I mean, okay, one more and I'll shut up because I know this is like super in the weeds, but I think it's important. Now, why don't we approach this from what jobs look like from a lending standpoint, right? So, and this is a broad-based coverage, not just housing specific, but I mean, look, mortgage and non-mortgage loan broker employment, that is still down big time. Well, it's recovered a little bit, but it's still down year over year. How people act like we're in some sort of new bull market. And I'm like, I have no idea how you are coming to that conclusion. It all begins and ends with jobs, right? It all begins and ends with jobs, because what is that? I mean, think about, if people don't have a job, they can't pay for things like housing. And if our economy is 70% consumer spending, then there are obviously implications for that. So I'm the reason I guess get on Twitter and rant and stuff. I'm sick and tired of all the liars. That's it.
Yeah, I get it. Kenny, let me ask you something, man, about your data inputs. And one of the issues that I've found with like the data is like trying to find data that's not fraudulent data.
Yeah.
And so you hit me because you went so deep into those job numbers. I'm wondering what your opinion on, and it's a controversial subject. I hate talking about it, but illegal immigration. Do you think illegal immigration is buffering those numbers so we can't see the decline? For example, if they're doing layoffs, would they start laying off illegal immigrants before citizens, and would that create a situation to where we don't really understand what's going on under the hood?
I mean, in terms of layoffs, I'm not so sure about that, just because of like that. Okay, so first off, layoffs is going to get captured, in my opinion, better in the other survey of job estimates. And I didn't show it, but they do actually have estimates of, say, things like construction jobs by race. And I've actually shown that like on Twitter, but you don't know how many of those are here legally versus illegally. And that to me is like unproductive if you're going down that rabbit hole. Do I think that the job surveys need improving? Absolutely. I mean, the one I just showed, that's the one that is subject to all the birth death model distortions. The other survey, the household survey, is the one that likely in certain areas is understating job growth. So maybe it looks a little bit weaker, and it's because all of those monthly estimates that they come out with are anchored by estimates of the population. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my take on it.
Kenny, I have a question for you. And I don't know if your data covered this or not, but last year I read a lot about manufacturing construction, about how the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act was causing this boom in non-residential construction. And then that story's kind of faded away. And we've seen stories about Intel fighting with the government over getting access to the grants for these new factories in Arizona. The EV plants are all getting either mothballed or scaled way back. At the same time, we're also building a lot of data centers out. I hear a lot about data center construction. So did any of your data give you any insight into what might be going on in the non-residential construction sector and what might be happening with those stories?
Yeah, so let me share my screen again. We'll look at this other, the other survey, which actually sort of gets close to what you're talking about. I mean, so this is the current population survey, otherwise known as the household survey. We're starting out here on just some random tab, but this is just showing, average weeks unemployed by a handful of different sectors. I know I'm kind of on a tangent here, but you can see, just like other sectors, my point in showing this is it's regardless of how you look at it, construction is slowing. So to your question, Jack, I'm going to jump over to this tab. So the other survey that we were looking at, it accounts for jobs by its employer facing. That's why it's called the establishment survey. So in other words, those industries that we were just looking at, whether it was leisure and hospitality, construction, professional business services, that is based on what the employer's what their primary, activity in terms of what they're engaged in as a business would be. You can actually look at employment data based on what an employee is doing, right? What their occupation is versus an industry approach. So that's what this is. And so I know these labels are cut off, but essentially what this is showing is, for example, the main bucket is, okay, you're a construction laborer. Okay, but what industry are you working in? Are you working in construction, or maybe you're a construction person and you're in manufacturing? So, for example, manufacturing. As a share of construction and extraction occupations, it's still quite low. You know, historically, it's not really way out of whack. I think, long story short is I think that this idea that you're seeing, I guess, a little bit of a pickup in manufacturing, and you could probably look at this in terms of semiconductors too, or something around that realm. It's really not showing up in job growth, right? I mean, construction and extraction occupations, if you were to just look at that in terms of all jobs, like in construction, if you were to cut it that way, this is like the bulk of those jobs. If it's going to show up somewhere, it would show up here, and it's just not. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. I mean, we'd see it in the numbers because assuming the numbers were telling the truth, which we have no choice but to take the numbers at face value. But if it was a significant boom to the economy and to the labor market, we'd see an uptick on the chart, and clearly not showing there.
Exactly.
And that lines up with some of the stories that I've seen more recently.
Right.
How a lot of the expectations for the EVs and for the semiconductors are now kind of being walked back, especially the Intel story this week. They're still fighting with the government over the grant and doing the DD to get that grant finalized. So it's not showing in jobs yet. Thank you, Kenny.
Exactly.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I got a couple comments, actually more than a couple, like 11 really good comments. I want to get to that, but I think Melody, did you have one more question for Kenny?
Well, I was just gonna, Kenny, when we were talking about that construction, the initial employee chart, I think, looking at that time period of the GFC that went really from like 2006 to around 2012, honestly, right? I'm just, you see, it was an absolute bloodbath in construction. And I think this is why so many people like Cantro with his Hope model, Mike Kantrowitz from Piper Sandler, they talk about how this really does lead to a lot of the distress. And just looking at that chart is just so stark. I mean, and thinking about the people, because in all of our travels that I've done, that Travis has done, that we've done together, you can just see all around these new build sites, just all the industry that has sprung up to support that, the coffee trucks, the food places, and then when those people pack up and go, I just don't think anybody is ready for what's to come. And so, just looking at that, it's one thing to think about what I've seen on the road, but looking at that chart and how deep that really went during the GFC is just, I think a lot of people are going to be shocked.
I couldn't agree more. And again, back to it's different this time is the fact that again, we just looked at this information at a national level, and it's just employment, right? That's all we were kind of looking at. But if you sort of pair all of the things together, whether it's like the permitting data, add in the demographics at a very granular level, the difference is like you're going to see some markets, at least in my opinion, that were not impacted like they were last time. I mean,
yeah,
you're right, Austin. I mean, and I think people think I'm biased when I say this, but Nashville. I mean, if you,
right.
if you normalize that across different markets and you compare it, Nashville does not look great. But anyway, that's a story.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing. So guys, when you please follow Kenny Cat PhD, because he does these amazing graphs of breaking it down by age. And I think, just recalling this, but I think the people that are suffering the most are the young right now, right? Like the 18 to 24 are really in trouble. And that's never good. I mean, we talk about China having that 20% unemployment rate for its youth. I mean, we are starting to have some scary, I think, and that doesn't even take into consideration participation, right? Do you know offhand what that participation rate looks like for that younger cohort? And sorry to put you on the spot. If you don't, no big deal.
Yeah. So for the younger groups, and I know that some folks have said, well, hey, maybe that's attributable to them staying in college versus like getting out of high school and getting a job, right? That could be a reason for a decline in, say, like the 16 to 24 age group participation rate. But the reality is it's just been sort of declining linearly for decades now. And I have that chart. Probably
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
call.
That's okay.
But anyway, we can look at that at another time. I have too many charts.
Absolutely.
I've
Yeah.
been told I showed too many charts, too many
No.
numbers.
I mean, listen, yeah, of course, this is a little dry, but this is the kind of stuff, I mean, that can really give you the insights when you're wanting to know what's going on, because you're not going to get that message in mainstream media. And many times you're not going to get it on FinTwit either. And so, yeah, a lot of what we talk about is kind of boring to many, but it's important. It's so important to dig into these numbers. And I love the data visualization. Again, encourage everybody to go out because the first time you see it, it's probably going to be, if you're like me, I don't have a graph brain at all. Mine's just numbers. It takes some time, but once you really start getting familiar with the presentation you've done, they'll get easier and easier to read for everybody. And they just have some gems of information in them. So I would encourage everyone to follow KeeneyCap. But go ahead, Travis.
No, I got some good stuff there. Kenny, to me, a couple things that I got from that is a couple recessionary indicators, like government jobs going up, usually an indicator that the economy is not strong, because the government needs to provide jobs for the economy. And then also, the construction jobs going down, but going down slowly. So I appreciated that. I still wonder about, the whole illegal immigration thing. But I do have, before you go, I have a question. I'm intrigued to know how you would answer this question. Obviously, each of us have our own opinions on what's happening, but this is from Muddy Sneakers. And if you can, here's a comment. If you don't own a home between now and the next 2 years, you will be priced out. Inventory will be gone, apartments will be filled, and rents will rise again. And I think they're concerned, Kenny, that, the government bailout, right? I think that's where they're coming from. The government's just going to bail them out. And this is I take this at face value. This is probably a very genuine, sincere comment. Probably a lot of people are thinking, Kenny, like, do we listen to them or do we listen to the Fed, who's been here our whole life? And we were raised to trust the Fed. So how would you respond to this, sir?
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to entertain the idea that they are going to come out guns blazing and just try and stimulate their way out of this. The problem is, it's, I mean, where exactly is that stimulus going to be targeted? I mean, are we talking about, kind of back to the illegal immigration issue in terms of home ownership in California? Is it going to be something like that? I mean, are we talking UBI? Because at this point, that's the only thing that seems to actually make sense. Because we've just been talking about jobs data, but I look at demographic data at a very granular level, and you can actually quantify the number of households in a county, for example, that pay, 50% or more of their income towards rent or maybe owning a home, right? Like all of those things, they get tracked, or, there's estimates of them. And when you look at that, you go, okay, well, you pretty much need deflation in order for any of this to make sense. Now, how long that goes on, right? I mean, are we going to have fits of stimulus going forward? I don't know. I feel like if anybody's being honest about it, I feel like everybody would say they don't know. I don't know. I don't know what they do seem very reactive. That's been the experience. It looks ugly. It looks ugly, especially younger people, and there's way too much supply. Period.
And Kenny, look at this. Okay, so here's what some people think, real quick. All right, and I throw this up. I'm not trying to intervene here, but I think this is what a lot of people think right here. So the crack up boom will be a nominal on assets, but negative in real terms because they are going to debase the crap out of money. And I brought that up because I think that's a really good thing to talk about, because in my opinion, what people don't realize is they've been doing that the whole time. They've been debasing the dollar the whole time. Look at the debt to GDP. Look at how parabolic all of these charts are. Look at the unfunded liabilities. We don't even have Social Security. We don't even have pension money. And so I think that we are in this situation because they have actually, because of this. What are your, any of you guys have a comment here? I loved how he stepped right into that for us to talk about.
My next story will be my comment.
Okay.
I do want to have a comment about the prior comment, and I agree with what Gypsy Tree is saying here, I don't really feel like I could add any value by embellishing on that. But the prior comment, saying, "Oh, if you don't buy a home, you're going to be priced out." That sounds a little bit like a fear of being priced out, or maybe even a little bit like fear of missing out. There was a little bit of FOMO reflected in that comment. No FOMO. We don't chase. Just going to throw that out there, guys. Homes are already affordable, piling in to a housing market that's already at bubble levels because you fear not being able to afford it next year. I mean, who does that? Oh, that's right, me in 2006. And that didn't end well. It was the worst financial decision I ever made in my life. So I'm just sharing my experience, my limited experience on the subject. No FOMO.
Yeah, we're building more multifamily than ever before, and we don't have the demographics to support it, guys. We're not having babies like we used to. And people say to that point, well, immigration, yes, that's already happened. And we still, if you go to, Kenny and I walked around Nashville, was that like east or west of downtown? I can't remember, Kenny. Where
south and kind of mainly west of downtown. I mean, it's really just right around.
Guys, just walk the street. If they ever actually fill those apartments, which they won't, but if they'll be bulldozed. I promise you. But if they did, you would never be able to leave your house. It's that saturated with building. I mean, and guys, for those of you that say this, just wherever you are in your hometown, use New Home Source, bring it up and go take a drive. And I promise you, even in Pittsburgh, even in Johnson City, Tennessee, which is a small mountain town, you will see these new builds, or you will see infill development as well. And so walk around, there's plenty of inventory, and that's what so many people are missing. But thank you so much, Kenny. Really enjoy it. And thank you for providing, your service to us and you do all this for free and you do it on social media just because it bothers you like it bothers us. And so thank you again for being a fellow doomer with us and for joining us today.
Appreciate that. Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. And one more time for the viewers, Kenny, I just want to plug you guys one more time. Here's his X Twitter. If you guys want some of these graphs that he does, come here, subscribe or follow. It's the follow. And again, Kenny, we appreciate you. We're going to get you out of here. All right, buddy?
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.
All right, see you, man.
Thanks, Kenny.
All right. So Melody.
All right.
Hey, Josh, before we move on to the next story, there was a super chat that we missed.
Yeah, let me throw that up. Here it is right here. You want to do that one, Jack?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mahon, Mr. Jock. I appreciate that very much for supporting the channel. He says BRICS meeting on October 24th. Also, October 24th, 1929 was Black Thursday. Ooh, the market crash. The first day of the Wall Street crash of 1929. P.S. The 24th is also a Thursday. All right. Some historical analogies there. I don't really share the excitement for the BRICS angle that a lot of people do, especially in the gold and silver space. I think it's a little overhyped by people who are selling precious metals. But BRICS does represent an economic powerhouse. I just think those countries can't. The only thing they agree on is that they hate America. I don't think they could really agree on what time it is outside of that. And so I'm not really in the let's panic over the BRICS currency camp. I don't really think BRICS is going to go well for them. I don't, the gold-backed currency thing, I just don't think they'll do it. Their totalitarian governments don't give away the power of the money printer willingly. But thank you very much, Chuck. Appreciate that.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, you can share my screen. Okay, so this story, there's a lot of irony in this story, and both of the stories I'm doing today are probably going to get my fellow doomers a little upset. So this is very interesting. You know, something I started talking about probably a year and a half ago is that as we were slowing, the builders particularly would have to pivot to affordable housing because there was just nobody left to buy. Instead, we got the BTFP, and the builders figured out they could do a lot of concessions, still make some money on that cash sitting in escrow, getting that interest. And so they were able to kind of sustain the market. But you're seeing a lot of people have already pivoted to affordable housing, to building, because they know this is the place where they can go to the government and get a handout for doing this development, right? So something I think we're going to continue to highlight a lot on this show are the public-private partnerships, because they just seem to be completely rife with the grift. But so this started, this is an existential crisis, according to this, as Travis and I say, extra stencil. But essentially, one of the nonprofits, it was a DC affordable housing development firm, Neighborhood Development Co., just was shutting down. And this was big news in DC, of all places, right? DC. I think a lot of people think nothing will happen in DC because it is where our government is, and that's where the grift is the biggest. But actually, so there are just some shocking numbers in this. And so what these companies all do, they provide affordable housing units for rent in the DC area. So let's see here. I'm just going to read a little bit about, I want to show you the numbers really quickly, because there's so many. I think there's 22,000 apartments right now that they're saying are at risk for foreclosure. And here's the first paragraph I read. So this top group representing property owners in the district raised this issue in June with a report titled A Looming Crisis. It looked at 5 DC housing firms that together own 13,788 units across 126 properties. And it found their combined rent delinquencies, the unpaid rent that they are owed, was $12.7 million. And so basically what's happened in DC, everybody knows about the eviction moratoriums and things like that. But now that eviction has restarted, you're seeing a ton of delays in the court systems, and people it's taking, like, whereas before, I think it was like 60 to 90 days, this could be 12 months to 16 months now that you're not getting paid. And this reminds me very much of the foreclosure crisis back in the day. Essentially, something that Travis and I argue is that, those foreclosures were slow rolled. And one of the ways they were slow rolled is the court system. I can tell you in New York, Florida, all over, especially in your judicial states, you could not move. A foreclosure in Florida would take 5 years because of the backup in the court system. New York as well. So what I think is happening, it's very interesting, is that this current administration, or our government, really kind of piled into rental the way that they did in the housing industry during COVID. And so we've kind of, they took their lessons from there and went to the rental market. But what's really interesting, and I want to go down to this quote down here. Let me just find it really quickly. Oh, and this is where I think Jack and Travis, you guys are going to get a little upset, because what's fascinating, we all know that CPI, everybody is saying, what was the highest that CPI got to, Jack and Travis?
9.1% in, I believe it was June of 2022 was the highest rate we got. Or don't quote me on that, but the time, 9.1 was the highest CPI went to, though.
Yeah. So in this article, and of course I can't find it right now, but in this article, it talks about how these landlords and their costs have gone up 20%. And so I think that's very ironic that this is in DC. These operators are about to go into foreclosure. They're filing bankruptcy. They're closing their doors because they cannot make enough to cover their debt service costs. And this is happening in DC because their ownership expenses have increased over 20%. And so, and we are told that inflation is coming down. So, to me, this was just a very good illustration about how the government can't save everything, right? So the solution here is that they are going to offer some bridge financing to some, or that's what people are talking about in governments, like to offer some financing to get these folks off, to get them performing again. But Jack, you'll love the very last sentence of this whole article. Because the guy says this is bridge loans won't solve the problem. He said the city should instead provide a large direct injection of funding to tenants to pay their back rent, making landlords whole while also giving tenants a clean slate and allowing them to remain in their homes. What does that also sound like?
Yeah, just pump money into the housing system and then wonder, why can't anybody afford housing? Let's just, I don't know, borrow, print, whatever, more cash into existence and pour it into the money. And then we can all be surprised when housing goes up.
Exactly. And this was also a really, to me, important quote. The problem for those owners is that the value of their properties appears to be plummeting. If a building has a high percentage of tenants not paying rent and isn't turning a profit, it isn't going to be attractive for investors looking to buy into the market. And because of these wider issues, very few investors are looking at DC. And in fact, if you read in the article, they talk about how DC is kind of a flyover zone. Investors do not want to operate there, very similar to California, because they cannot make money. They can't, if you've got somebody in your house for 16 months not paying, that's a huge financial burden. I mean, Travis, you're a landlord. That would be insanity, right?
Yeah, it is insanity. I mean, I got some questions for you, but keep going. This is crazy.
No, it's just, I think this just shows the state of things, and to what Kenny said before about the UBI or universal basic income. And I can guarantee you, I talked about this actually about 18 months ago, but similar to what happened with the FDIC taking those affordable units in New York, and Jack, you did such a great job on that story on your channel. I think what you're going to see here, and this will be ground zero, that I bet you Fannie and Freddie take these properties onto their balance sheets and start in some way managing them. So what you're seeing here, guys, and I'll talk about this in my second story, but it's the law of unintended consequences, right? And that is where people think that they're doing a good thing, but in reality, what happens is everybody cannot afford the current situation, including these folks that are partnering directly with the government. And so, we've basically created an unsustainable situation. So just wanted to this is a shorter story, but just wanted to highlight this article because I think this is, it's funny in all the wrong ways, if that makes sense. But also to me, it highlights how essentially they took what happened during the GFC with mortgage, and they're just applying those same types of to the rental industry.
Another thing too, Melody, on top of the renters not paying rent, another reason why these developers are going to want to stay clear of these types of program, like in Washington, D.C., is HUD has, in order to get those grants, right? So HUD has grants like free money here, developer, here's some free money. In order for these developers to receive that free money from us, the taxpayer, they have to adhere to certain guidelines, and they have to generally finish the work prior to receiving a refund. And so it puts these developers in a situation to where their margin is cut even more. So they're already struggling because of QT with the margin. If they go through these HUD programs, they find, with all the criteria, with all those guidelines, it's going to be more expensive. So it's already expensive, but it's not going to make it more affordable at first. It actually makes it more expensive at first. And so that's another issue as well, that I think we're starting to realize that HUD, the reason why HUD is coming up to a brick wall is because the entire system is overvalued and overheated.
Guys, I think we should put a pin in this story, because I think we're going to be back to this. I think probably within a year, maybe two, we're going to hear about some regional bank in the DC area that failed because of non-performing loans on multifamily housing, and it is going to be because of this story. We'll be back. We'll be back to this one. All right. And that's exactly what happened in New York when Signature Bank failed. The FDIC ended up buying up all the loans that were backing those rent-controlled buildings in New York. The FDIC still owns all that debt, so that's nice. Our bank deposits are backed up by non-performing loans to slumlords. And also New York Community Bank, which almost failed. That was late last year, early this year, New York Community Bank almost failed. So, these stories are out there. There's a lot of regional banks are under stress because of this. And if I might soapbox for a minute, I have a pretty radical idea on how to solve this problem. All right. And bear with me here, guys. If people don't pay the rent, you evict them. It sucks. All right. It sucks losing houses. But you know what? If I don't pay my mortgage, they're going to come take my house away. Why should it be different for anybody else? If you don't pay, you're out. All right. Sucks. Life is hard. Moving on. And then what you do is you fill those buildings with people who can pay the rent. And then all of a sudden the landlords are getting paid. And if you can't fill the building with people who can pay, maybe that means the rent is too damn high. There's my man, the karate instructor, saying the rent is too damn high. So then the natural solution is to lower the rent until you find people who can afford it. And now housing just became more affordable. And then, of course, the landlords will probably not be making enough income because of that lowered rent. And when those landlords default, you let them default. They made a bad business decision. They borrowed too much money at too high an interest rate to buy a building that wasn't worth it. It sucks, but they lose money. And if a bank fails because of bad loans to those landlords, let that bank fail. It sucks, but life is hard. Stop trying to pump more money in. Stop trying to socialize the losses and then pretending to be surprised when the rent keeps going higher. There is a free market solution. It is easier for everybody. It's not pain-free. There is no pain-free solution to any of this stuff, guys. Anybody who claims there is lying to you. But let's just give it a shot. Let's try a free market solution for once. You might be pleased with the result.
Right. And because if those folks were being paid, if these, all of these folks that are, these 22,000 units are in jeopardy of foreclosure. But if the people that own these units were being paid, they would probably have jobs available and things like that. That's how this would all work. And we keep intervening to make the pain less, and we're just making it more and more. And of course, we're also transferring the wealth to the wealthy and taking it from the middle class. I think some of these are mom and pop investors. And so, this is just it's just so backwards. And at the same time, you can totally see how this paves the way for the government to get even more involved in housing. And that'll be my second story that we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. But to me, this is just so ironic, and it's right in our nation's capital.
Yeah, and all that kind of goes into my story. I'm going to start right now with my story, and it's about the DOJ's investigation on rent fixing. And I have a couple opinions here now. Unfortunately, to kind of dovetail off of what Melody was just discussing, unfortunately, what this is going to lead to is more government control. And that's what, again, it's taken me so long to start to realize that any help from the government at all seems to lead to more control and more loss of freedom. And we're sold a premise that this is good for the people. This is good for society. But again, when we look at the math, when we look under the hood, it seems like the Fed is only helping banks. And it seems like we continue to pay for that and continue to get lied to. But regardless, we're going to look at what the Department of Justice is doing when it comes to rent fixing. And rent fixing and elevated rents have been an issue for a lot of American families. Obviously, it's still normally way more expensive to purchase versus rent, but rent is high. And so what I did is I used a program to help kind of summarize exactly what's going on with the rent fixing. And then we're going to ask a couple other questions as well. And some of the things I did, you guys, I use this program called Liner, and Liner allows me to go to various articles, like this, Political, all these articles, and highlight. I can actually highlight, if you guys are ever interested in this, I actually highlight web articles and analyze certain text. So it's a pretty cool tool, actually. Found it's incredibly helpful as long as you're using it for the right reasons. But I'm going to get started, you guys. So, the Department of Justice is indeed actively investigating allegations of rent price fixing in the residential housing market. First of all, when I'm reading this, it gets me upset. But this investigation has expanded and intensified over time, focusing on both property management companies, and here's the interesting thing, and the software they are using to set rental prices. Okay, so when we ask about what are the key aspects of this investigation, and I'll get to number 3 here in a minute, which is really kind of mind-blowing. Here's what this says. So here's where we're at with the investigation. So there's a criminal probe right now. The DOJ has escalated its investigation by opening a criminal probe into the price fixing allegations. This marks a significant development in the initial civil investigation, indicating the seriousness with which the DOJ is approaching this matter. So they found some stuff that looks to be pretty dirty here. Now, in addition, they're going to focus on RealPage. Okay, so RealPage is the company, and also property managers that are using that software. Now, the investigation centers on RealPage, a software company that develops property pricing software, and some of its customers, which include large residential property owners and management firms. The DOJ is examining whether or not RealPage's software facilitates price fixing among these entities. So it sounds to be an industry standard program. So a lot of big companies, institutional investors using this. Now, this is interesting. Algorithmic price fixing. So within their very software. This case is notable as one of the few known criminal probes involving algorithmic price fixing. Very interesting. The DOJ is concerned that RealPage's software might be used as a means for competitors to exchange sensitive pricing data, potentially leading to collusion. So far, you guys, when I'm reading this, I'm like, what's the difference between this and the Central Appraisal District? But let me just keep going, okay? So here, let's go in the broader context here, okay? Now, I'm not getting political. This is from Political. Again, here's all of the references right here. But the Biden administration priority, this is what this is saying. The investigation aligns with the Biden administration's focus on getting control of American households. I'm just kidding. It doesn't say that, but that's what they're doing. Their focus on cracking down on anti-competitive activities, particularly in the housing market. President Biden has specifically highlighted actions against rent gouging among corporate landlords. So I guess these corporate landlords aren't really helping society after all. Bullet point number 2, the legal actions. Let me tell you guys where we're at with legal actions. In addition to the DOJ's investigations, RealPage and numerous property owners and managers are facing class action lawsuits. Thank you, America, for not having apathy. And investigations by state attorney generals. Thank you, attorney generals, for taking this seriously as well. Now, let me read some potential outcomes, and I'm going to stop here after I get to the next section. Now, potential outcomes. While the investigation is ongoing, the DOJ is reportedly preparing a civil lawsuit against RealPage. This lawsuit would accuse the company of selling software that enables landlords to illegally, that's the point, illegally share confidential pricing information and conclude on setting rents. Okay. Now, I hope you're chomping at the bit, Jack. I don't want you to go yet. Okay. I want to read this next part. Okay. So let me read the industry response. First of all, RealPage has denied, obviously, any wrongdoing, stating that its software is designed to be legally compliant. So again, when I'm reading this, so far I'm thinking it's another ploy for the government to come in and to take control over something. They have successfully confused the public or created enough outcry that it gives them enough support to take things away. Okay, so that was my first impression. But when I kept going and when I kept digging and when I asked what specific evidence is the DOJ looking for in this investigation, then it started hitting me. Well, dang it, it's not only just the Fed. There is legitimately fraud and corruption that exists throughout our markets. And so when I go to evidence, look at this, guys, restricting supply. These programs, and I question Opendoor. Remember, Opendoor is a flipper. They own a lot of properties. They own properties in my market. I'm wondering how many of them are taking properties off the market to make it appear as if the market has less inventory than what is actually existing. Very interesting, but this is what this says, restricting supply. The DOJ is also investigating whether RealPage's software is used to match vacancy rates this is so crazy, across different rental properties. This practice could be seen as unlawfully restricting supply in the market, which may attribute to the artificial inflation of rents. That is very polarizing, but let's everyone just chill, right? Because is it them trying to trick me into voting on a law, or is this a multifaceted issue here? Let me almost done here. Witness testimonies and expert analysis. The DOJ is incorporating testimonies from various witnesses, experts, analysts that indicate how RealPage's system influences landlords' pricing decisions. Also, they're looking for internal documentation. I'm going to ask, what are, other industries where there's price fixing, but I just wanted to make a comment to Jack and Melody and see if they have anything, maybe they want to share here. But okay, so far, what I'm getting from all of this, it's almost as if the Fed creates a situation to where they print money, it's stuck in the system. Okay, so all this money has been printed, all this inflation, it's stuck in the system, and it's almost as if they're teaching society how to commit fraud. It's almost as if they're tricking people. Hey, here's all this money right here. Violate the law in some way, grow your business. But as soon as there's enough public uproar, the government then says, okay, we finally have enough support. We have enough public outrage to go into this private sector and to take control of that part of the system. That's what it feels like to me. I think the root of the issue here is always going to be the Federal Reserve. And then after that is the fraud, corruption, and greed from the human beings involved. What is your guys' impression so far?
Well, Trav, you asked about, examples of price fixing. The biggest example is OPEC, right? The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, the oil cartel. They rig prices. They literally rig prices. They all get together and they conspire to put just less oil on the market than the market needs to make sure the price stays high. It's illegal to do in the U.S. That's why the U.S. is not a member of OPEC and U.S. companies aren't. I am firmly opposed to price fixing, and it's illegal, and it should be. It's anti-competitive. It interferes with free market signals. Anything that does so, I'm opposed to. And I think I'm not terribly familiar with this case, but I've heard from people whose opinions I respect that what RealPage does is pretty sinister in how they rig prices. And obviously homes are unaffordable, so it's possible this is contributing to that. So I am all for prosecuting people who are doing this and penalizing them and making sure the penalties of doing so are more than the proceeds from the criminal activity. That's important. A lot of times these slaps on the wrist that these guys get are not prohibitive enough to prevent it from happening again. And I would also warn that while the government is prosecuting, don't let them seize control of housing prices. Don't let them use this as a backdoor to implement price controls. Because if you think there's a shortage now, just wait until the price controls get implemented. It'll be even worse.
Melody?
Yeah, so I have a lot to say about this story. If you dig into this investigation, one thing they did very mob-like is if you wouldn't take their advice to up your rent and you were on this system, they would come visit you in your office and ask you why aren't you raising your rent to what everybody else is. And I personally, so for the first year of tracking like a moron, or useful idiot, I guess, I used RealPages because they had data out there. And so I was looking at markets as well as I was looking at individual complexes in some of these cities that have this inundation of multifamily development. And the rents never moved. They never moved. And it made zero sense to me. I could see all of this inventory coming online in Charlotte, in Denver, all over the place, and they never moved. And then what they started to do is on the front page, let's say you're looking at Seattle. We had somebody earlier say they were from Seattle. You could type Seattle and you would go to a market summary of Seattle, and it would tell you, okay, vacancy has increased by X percent year over year. Rents have gone up X percent. So what happens when you go look at markets like San Antonio, Dallas, Atlanta, all these markets that are in multifamily distress? They don't put the numbers in there at all. They don't. So anyway, my point is like this company was not acting. They are very much deserve this investigation, and they did exactly what you said, Travis. They held off supply. If they couldn't get a certain rent, they just kept it vacant. That's what they did. And this was definitely collusion because everybody has. Can you imagine? Everybody has. The transparency. Why don't we have that transparency, so that they could set these market rents? So this story, it's really upsetting to me because so many people, we've seen homelessness increase. We've seen, and the fact that, this group of individuals just, we're keeping these prices artificially high, is very galling. But at the same time, Travis, I remember I was part of the AG settlement with my company over those foreclosure and servicing practices. And at the time, I knew that they were actually colluding. The DOJ was colluding with the CFPB and other regulatory bodies just to extract their pound of flesh. And so I very much think, and by the way, we were basically proven innocent of wrongfully foreclosing on folks, but that didn't change the fines or the perception. And so I think what's going to happen here but what happened after that? 85% of all mortgages are now government owned, or by a GSE or by the government, Ginnie Mae. So that's what happens. And so we have to demand more accountability. And we really do need real law and order in this situation. And there was definitely something going on, but just like Jack said, we can't let it be an excuse to come in and take more control of our housing stock.
Yeah, and there's a second part to the story as well. That was the first part, and you guys picked up on it. That was what I was hoping everyone was understanding. There's two bad guys here, right? Like I want to make sure that people don't think that because there's this horrible corruption going on potentially with RealPage, that the government coming in to make changes is a good thing. That it could potentially be they're both bad things. That I'm saying is potentially it was created that way. I don't know that for sure. It's very interesting. And also, Melody, you brought up a good point as far as, one of the things that I've learned when going into the central appraisal districts is someone came forward that was an appraiser. Okay, so he's an appraiser. He helps appraisers that appraise property value for residential mortgages. And what I discovered is a lot of these appraisers are being, I don't want to say forced, but unintentionally pushed into fraud. In other words, if they don't meet these values, if some of these appraisers don't meet these values, you can, like a realtor or anyone involved in this transaction, you can report them to HUD. And HUD is being extremely aggressive right now with appraisers that are not meeting the overvaluation. So it puts appraisers in a situation to where they can't even do their job, without it being corrupt. But regardless, let's go on because, I thought the price fixing was super important. I'm going to ask this question as well. Let me move my face down here. Sorry about that, guys. So then I started asking the question, what other industries have price fixing? Because obviously price fixing is absolutely destroying us and is absolutely not fair. So when I asked that question, Jack, where's other price fixing at? Look at this. I think Jack would like this first one, pharmaceutical industries. Okay. So the pharmaceutical industries, Jack, pretty sure you have multiple stories on what's going on there, huh?
They're nice guys. Great pharma. Big pharma. They do wonderful things for society.
Is that right? Okay. Well, that's just number one. Number two, automotive parts industry. So our vehicles, you guys remember paying these overvalued prices for vehicles during lockdowns? Did you know there's price fixing going on during that time? Let's keep going. Food and beverage industry. Have you guys been to the store recently? Anyone been to the grocery store recently? Airline industry. Wasn't there a new law passed? More control to the government. Pity about the greed and corruption. Technology industry. And that's why we, Melanie and I always say triangulate. If you're just using one set of data and you're basing your opinions on that, you have a high probability of tap dancing on a stage that was built on fraud. If you guys understand what I mean. Now, I also asked the question is, what impact does this have on consumers? Okay, so if you guys are wondering what impact does price fixing actually have on us, This is so messed up, man. You know, it's just, and I'm going to go into the solution here in a minute because this is very heavy to me. So this impact of the price fixing is leading to obviously higher prices because they need a higher margin, higher profit, higher stock prices. Okay. Higher prices, number one. Here's the second thing. This is awful. You guys remember this? Okay. Look at the buyer's remorse surveys, guys. Reduced choices and quality. That's unfortunate. Number three, decreased consumer surplus. You guys remember the inventory shortage that we apparently have? That's a bummer. Innovation stifling. Okay, interesting. Economic distortion. Kind of hard to understand what's going on, right, guys? I mean, I'm saying one thing, someone else is saying another thing. It's very difficult. There's still a lot of dust kicked up in the air, and that's intentional. That's intentional. And I'm going to say the biggest price fixers, maybe the Federal Reserve, I don't know. Maybe they're the real price fixers here, but legal and economic consequences. In summary, price fixing imposes significant adverse effects on consumers, financial well-being, and the economic health. So that's a lot of stuff. I'm already like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Right? I mean, there's so many things against us, so much price fixing. I don't even know if it's the private. Who should we be more concerned about? The government intervention, the Fed is the real manipulator here, the private industry. I mean, as a consumer, Melody, Jack, it's very hard not to let all of this weigh down on us so much that it feels like we can't even breathe, right? Because it's so heavy. And so I asked myself before I presented this story is how would I like to end the story? What solution is here in the story? Because it feels like when I did this, Melody, it felt like it was me against the world. It felt like I had nowhere to turn. And I should just give up, right? That was just my emotions, right? My hope was being dashed. And so it just reminded me, I mean, I started praying. I won't go into my religious beliefs, but to me, what the solution here is, it's you. It's you, the viewer. It's me. It's Melody. It's Jack. It's each and every one of us, because here's what I learned. Apathy is one of the biggest crises in America. Apathy means that you don't care, that you're watching this. You don't care enough to take action. Okay, so a lot of people are like, oh, doomers, fear mongering. Okay, but once you open your eyes, and it's painful, and I started this with that 6 month to a year journey where I had to go through myself, go through the walk, go through the pain. But ultimately, it always leads me back to the same thing, guys: love, service, community, and caring enough to take action. And the actions aren't a lot; it's just small action, and part of that action is empowerment. And so I believe the solution is our community. I believe our solution is loving each other, right? And helping each other, and understanding that some people are going to struggle hard with this information. I mean, I still struggle. I was raised to trust the Fed and to feel like they were the good guys. That's how I was raised. And so it sucks, right? But I'm going to keep moving forward. The awareness is part of it. But I think that we got to remember, you guys, the more that we don't care, the more the fraud will exist. The more that we care, the less the fraud will exist. Fraud and apathy are linked. Fraud and apathy are linked. The more you care, okay, the less the fraud. So just remember that, guys. In other words, when you stop watching this video, go empower yourself and love some people, and make some change. That's all I got.
Great job, Travis. So I recently had a new follower who has some very interesting ideas. He's from Canada, but apparently his company is giving $100,000 to anybody that can prove that home prices, for instance, change in a month. Okay, because if you think about the biggest price fixing scam out there, who is it?
The Fed.
NAR. These MLSs. I mean, the multiple listing sites, services, like you can't get access to those, right? Unless you are a realtor, right? And so we don't, in reality, that's one of the biggest price fixing scams out there. And we don't really talk about it that way because home prices don't change in a month. I mean, that's essentially what he's arguing. And so so anyway, he talks a lot about the MLSs and just kind of how they are, how not transparent they are. And they're all so very different. That's the thing that I realized when I went out and looked at the over 600, but each of them kind of acts like a little mob, like a little price fixing mob. And so, and I think not having transparency is one of the reasons we're also in this place. But I agree with you, Travis, about caring, and that is how we combat fraud. Absolutely.
Yep, and I don't think it takes a lot of caring, Melody. I think honestly, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It takes a very small fraction of us to come together to make change. Very small. And so I'm very focused. Very focused.
Just look at what you just did, Travis, with Mitch. I mean, this is huge. And what you're doing with those property tax courses, how to protest. I mean, that's the kind of story that changes people's lives. And that was a lot of effort on your part. I don't want to say that, but all you did was respond to an email. That's how it started. And so it's small, and I use small steps to affect radical change, right? It only takes a little bit of effort on everybody's part, but that is not saying you've put a ton of effort into this, which we're all very appreciative of.
Yeah, and then that's what I mean. I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I've recorded 22 videos so far for the first half of that course, which is available, and it's completely free. It's completely free because I want to help lead people in to the central appraisal districts. Small amount of us need to care, and I want to make change, and I want to show people that. And it's something that I feel like it's my purpose to help society. I want to serve. I mean, that's always what I come back to, Melody. When I look at all of this stuff and I sit back when I'm done working and I'm like, okay, what did Melody, all these people, the commenters teach me? They taught me that it is just so much more important to love, man. You got to love, you got to serve, because outside of love and outside of service is greed, corruption, fraud, ego, and selfishness. And I don't want to be part of it.
Preach, brother.
Thank you.
The one thing I would add, guys, is that anytime price fixing is happening, you should also look at what barriers to entry has the government put in place that allows that price fixing. Because if 2 or 3 companies are conspiring to artificially inflate prices, they're also creating an opportunity for new competition to come in and undercut their artificially higher prices and steal away market share. And if that's not happening, it's not because somebody doesn't have dollar signs in their eyes. It's because there's some other force is preventing those new entrants in the market from appearing, and that's almost always the government. So before you reach out and say more government control is the solution, we should ask ourselves, why is RealPage even able to do this? Why are these people able to conspire to artificially rig prices? Anybody should be able to come in and undercut them, but somebody's stopping them. It's always the government.
Bingo, man.
Yep.
Whenever you're ready.
All right. Travis, could we share my screen? Because we are going to talk about the new Argentine funny money. And, what we're looking at here, this is my boy. This is Javier Milei, the new libertarian president of Argentina, who, amazing, should be in the Guinness Book of World Records for proving that it's actually possible for a libertarian to win an election. I didn't think that was possible. I thought there was like a law of physics against that. But he actually won. He's a very loudmouth, bloviating politician. He's here with his signature chainsaw, which he uses as a metaphor for cutting government spending. And he has done most of what he has promised to do. He still hasn't gotten rid of that central bank in Argentina, but he has drastically implemented austerity measures. And of course, when you're in a country that has several 100% monthly inflation because you double your money supply every month, well, it takes drastic measures to solve that. And so there's a lot of austerity going on in Argentina right now. The Argentine government has actually swung rapidly to a operating surplus because of the cutting of government departments that he's done. But that's also caused a lot of pain because almost the entire economy in Argentina was run by the government. Almost everybody was a government employee. And so that austerity, although it's starting to have its effect on the government's finances and inflation is starting to come down, it's also causing hardship in some of the poorer countries. And that led to this story in Bloomberg this week. New Argentine currency launched to offset Milei's shock therapy. The remote province of La Rioja has created its own currency, the Chacho, to try to revive its moribund economy. And those Peronists guys, I tell you, they created this monster of inflation with their modern monetary theory, which was the law in Argentina for decades. It created one of the poorest economies in Argentina. Even though they're one of the biggest food exporting countries in the world, they should be a thriving economy, but they're not because of their money printing and their modern monetary theory. Milei comes in and tries to stop it. And now this Peronist provincial government in La Rioja is saying, well, if you're not going to print money, we're going to create our own money, the Chacho, which is shown here, and we're going to helicopter it into the economy. And I just want to read a couple of excerpts from this story about the new provincial currency. I mean, it's like if we were to suddenly have government spending cuts in the United States and California just decides we're going to implement the Wokie, the new California currency, and we're going to helicopter it out to the whole state to try to counter the counter-inflationary forces of those cuts. It is here in La Rioja that the financial toll of President Javier Milei's shock economic therapy, a high-stakes bid to tame chronic inflation, can be best observed. When Milei slashed the monthly cash transfers from the federal government to the provinces, La Rioja went broke. In February, it fell into default, and soon the local economy had sunk into a deep recession. So the governor, an outspoken critic of Milei by the name of Ricardo Quintela, dialed up the radical plan of his own. He created the province's own currency, the Chacho. He had sheets of it printed up and started doling it out in wads of 50,000 to all government employees. Stimmy cash, that's what they're doing. It was a little bonus payment, Quintela said, to help people buy more of the essentials they'd been skimping on. Shop owners weren't outright forced, but rather were strongly encouraged to accept the Chachos just like they would pesos. One Chacho is supposed to equal 1 peso. And there's text in this article that mentions that these government employees, and again, almost everybody who's working in this province is a government employee, that they were waiting in line for 7 hours to get their stimmy payment in Chachos. And those 50,000 Chachos that were paid out to government workers, that's about $40 US based on the current exchange rate. And don't quote me on that, because by the time that news reaches you, it's probably already fallen. But waiting in line, doing nothing, no economic activity, you're not producing anything for 7 hours to get $40 of print money. You can already see how human productivity is just destroyed by money printing here. Chachos finally in hand after waiting in line for 7 hours. They wasted no time in spending them. And we're watching Gresham's Law in real time here. We'll talk a little bit about Gresham's Law in a minute. But at Refinor, a gas station in the provincial capital, business jumped 10% that morning. And over at Noed Fama, a little corner butcher shop, about half of all customers paid that first week with the new currency. Juan Bonaldi, a cashier there, said the shop owners, leery of getting stuck with too many Chachos, had concocted their very own, very detailed rules. Customers will only receive change in pesos if the purchase price of that meat they're buying equals at least 80% of the value of the Chachos they're handing over. Change will otherwise be provided in Chachos. When not possible, the order canceled. And you can already see here how this money is becoming worthless on day one. These people waited in line for hours to get their $40, again, paid for free, wasting time, no economic activity created. They go right away and they spend it as soon as possible. All right, that's almost a crack up boom in real time. Demand for gas jumps 10%. Well, that's inflation. If you create money out of thin air, you're not creating any more value, but you're creating artificial demand. So we see gas sales jump 10% that morning. That's going to lead to higher gas prices. You also see this butcher shop. Nearly half of all the customers paid with their new Chachos. That's because you pay with the funny money because you know that funny money is going to become worthless. And so you try to unload it as fast as you can. This is the crack up boom happening in real time. And the shop owners are weary of this. So they say, hey, you're not going to pay for 1 Chacho worth of meat with a 50,000 Chacho bill so you can get 49,000 pesos of change. We're onto that. So they create these special rules that prevent people from exchanging their Chachos for pesos. This illustrates the essence of what the whole Chacho scheme ultimately is: a way for a deadbeat province that has been cut off from federal funds and locked out of debt markets at home and abroad to obtain financing and keep spending. Now, this was some strong language by Bloomberg here. I was really amazed to see this sentence. A deadbeat province that's been cut off from federal funds in the debt market. They can't borrow money. The federal government won't give it to them. And so they just create their own funny money out of thin air in order to try to stimulate spending. Unusually strong language from Bloomberg here, but they're right. This is a deadbeat province doing what deadbeat provinces do, just creating money out of thin air. Now, I want to talk about Gresham's law here. Here's Thomas Gresham, and some of you guys may be familiar with this. Gresham's law is bad money drives out good money. And we have seen this time and time again, even here in the United States, when they took the silver out of the coinage, people start to hoard their good money when bad money is introduced, right? When the Chacho was introduced, the bad money started being used right away. People started paying with pesos less. They start hoarding their pesos and spending their bad money as soon as they can because they know that bad money is not going to be worth anything soon. And so the good money is no longer circulating. Now, also think about what's going to happen in this economy over time, right? The pesos are going to be slowly paid out of the province because you're going to spend your money within the province. You're going to spend your chachos. You're not going to spend your pesos. And so eventually, as you pay for things imported from other provinces or as you travel to other provinces, you're going to spend your pesos out there. Sooner or later, there won't be any pesos left in La Rioja. And so the bad money will chase out the good money. And Argentina actually has an established history of this. In the early 2000s, the same thing happened. They had a collapse in the currency. They had a big economic crisis. And so provinces started issuing their own currency, the patacones, I'm probably going to mispronounce some of this stuff. Sorry, guys. The LACAP, the Bocade, and the Secacor. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these right, but there was at least 4 different provincial currencies were created within Argentina in the early 2000s, and they all failed exactly in the way we're seeing with shop owners limiting what their exchange rate is and, not letting people collect too much change. The bad money chased out the good money with very predictable consequences. This is Peronists and modern monetary theorists. You get a libertarian in office. He's starting to do the job. All right. It's not all unicorns and rainbows in Argentina. There is real pain. Unemployment is rising because they're cutting government spending, and everybody works for the government. And so that's causing pain. But at the second things get hard, these guys will print. And that's exactly what they're doing. And since the federal government won't do it, the state government is doing it now. And it's not going to work well. It just goes to show you what Javier Milei is up against. It's not going to work. Things are going to get worse in La Rioja because of this. But all I have to say is, Viva Libertad, carajo. Good luck, Mr. Milei. The world is watching. I hope it works.
Very good, Jack. I had one thing real quick before Melody jumps in. Look she wants to say something. You moved her. I could tell. No, but seriously, what this reminds me of is what can happen to the U.S. Because when you were first talking, I'm like, man, this is very similar path that the U.S. has taken with the devaluation of money. And I say that because of the way that the debt works, it's a reverse amortization schedule. So instead of the U.S. paying off debt, they just increase the debt and kick the can down the road. It's so much so that it's absolutely parabolic and people can't afford their bills, anymore. So, I look at that story as a lesson that we can learn as citizens. And that lesson brings me to the fall of Rome. And the fall of Rome didn't fall. It was a huge empire. Rome was a huge empire, and it did not get destroyed based on just one thing falling apart. The fall of Rome was the result of many things within the society, many keystones, many important pillars within that society that all failed. And because they all failed almost simultaneously, that destruction and that collapse fed into each other. Come to find out that all of those keystones, in my opinion, they failed because of corruption. And so the premise with understanding the fall of Rome is understanding that it's okay to go through pain. And the more that we go through pain the right way together, we could stop like massive collapses from happening. But it's going to take a politician. It's going to take a government that is honest, that loves people, and that really wants to serve, because they will have to lead us through pain. And if they don't, if we're not allowed to go into recession and then stay in recession, we have to be allowed to stay in recession. I don't see how the U.S. isn't going to fall like Rome.
Travis, Rome is a good example. I mean, you were centering on the corruption, but what we're looking at here in Argentina with the Chacho, it's currency debasement. It's just another form of currency debasement, right? And when you debase the currency, Gresham's law, it's an economic principle. It's not some guy's idea or some man's opinion. It is as real as gravity or any of the other forces of nature or laws of physics. Bad money chases out good money. And in ancient Rome, they started to debase the currency in order to save money and to inflate the money supply. They started diluting the silver in their coinage. And of course, the people started rushing to spend their less silver coinage, and they started hoarding their good silver coinage because it was worth more money. And it led to inflation, and it led to strife, and the poor got poorer. So it happens in a very predictable way. And so you're right to use that analogy of ancient Rome. Absolutely. Gresham's law played out there as well.
Okay, real quick, Raymond, I hope you're doing well, man. I love you, buddy. Thank you for all your support. No pain, no gain. I mean, I love it. It's okay. No one wants to go through pain, and I think that's the result of the apathy. No one wants to leave their bubble to face the realities beyond that bubble, because it's very scary. And so I love Raymond. Raymond to me is a kind of a token of, he's symbolic. Raymond is symbolic because I see Raymond as an American citizen. Raymond is an American citizen. He has old-fashioned values. He works hard. But this guy right here, he is getting beat up. It is hard for this man to hang on and to remain faithful. I mean, this guy's he's struggling. There's it feels lonely. It feels lonely, and that's why I'm glad I know you guys, because it feels lonely when my eyes are open. At least I feel like my eyes are open, and when other people's eyes are not. And so Raymond represents that American that's working hard, that's this close to giving up. And I'm not trying to front on you, Raymond. You know how every single person has always said how much value you bring back to the community, sir. Every single person tells you that, because you bring value, but you got to love yourself first. And I appreciate that $5, brother. That was it. I love you, Raymond.
Well, the root of the word austerity is the word severe, is where what austerity is really based on. And austerity is never popular. It's painful. But we as a civilization are imbecilic children when it comes to economics. We act like any pain felt by anybody must be magically legislated away, and that there's some magic eraser that can just legislate away pain. It doesn't work that way. It ends in currency debasement every time. And we know how currency debasement ends. And so these stupid emotional arguments against austerity that are used, oh, well, it's hard for people to be austere. Okay, fine. But you know what? Inflation is hard for people too. How did the last few years go for everybody? And so I agree, no pain, no gain. I'm not one of these like Opus Dei guys that whips myself for pleasure on the side or anything like that. It's just reality, guys. We're not children shoveling sugar into our mouths. You got to eat healthy or you're going to get fat and die. You got to abide by basic economic principles, or you're going to hyperinflate away your currency and your country's going to collapse. And we've lost that. We have no discipline. And I'm hoping to fix that. That was my cat sneezing, by the way. I don't know if you guys heard that.
Bless you.
Bless you, midnight.
Yeah. Jack, I just think that story is so great because it's a microcosm, and you can look at exactly what happened immediately. If only we in America could look at this story and understand, the consequences of that stimulus. It reminds me, like, pretty soon, somebody's going to be carrying or pushing wheelbarrows of chachas, or however you say it, like they were in Weimar, Germany. Because the first thing, as I was looking at that story, I was thinking, well, somebody's going to immediately go, up their prices. And then, in Weimar, people would take their lunch breaks to go buy groceries because they were so scared of prices going up by the end of the day. And so, it's kind of, I just feel like that it was a really good illustration of those economic principles. I just wish we all could understand them and see them. So, interesting, Bloomberg's, like you say, that that strong language, that is very interesting to see.
Yes, but I mean, Bloomberg tends to be the mouthpiece for maybe the watered down version of modern monetary theory here in the States. But, like the Bloomberg, the Odd Lots people.
Yeah.
I mean, they blocked me on Twitter because they did a series on why the $1 trillion coin should be minted in order to stop the debt ceiling debates. And I was like, you idiots. Like, what do you think minting $1 trillion coin is going to do? If only history was rife with examples of how that ends. And of course, they blocked me right away. But also, can we share my screen again real quick, Travis? Because, Melody, you were talking about, how this is how it starts and things like that. And I I can't believe I missed this line in the article, but they're showing right here, Chachos come in denominations 1,000 to 50,000. Some 3 billion of them, or roughly $9 million, have been handed out. The plan is to bring it up to 9 billion. So their plan is already to triple the number of Chachos in circulation. They're already doing it. These people are so predictably stupid. And I don't know, can you even say stupidity? Because at this point, they know, right? I mean, the inflation is so bad in Argentina, they have to know what's going to happen. So I can only assume then that they're not imbeciles and that they are intentionally trying to artificially create inflation in their province in order to use it as an argument against Javier Milei to say, like, look, it's not having the desired effect on inflation, all the things he's doing. Well, gee, maybe that's because you created your own currency and inflated the hell out of it. They're creating artificial demand for food and for meat. They showed it in that one comment about how, gas demand went up 10% in a day and half of the people paid in Chachos on the first day.
And that's how the Fed created fake demand for housing as well, essentially by buying that MBS and those, and really sort of, promoting speculation. And I think this was kind of your point earlier, Travis, is that, these policies actually encourage fraud. And just in the story about DC, a lot of those people are struggling and do need cheap places to live. However, a lot of people have taken advantage of the system, and this is what happens, So yeah, great story, Jack. We've got to follow this one because I have a feeling it's going to get very interesting.
Yeah, I think we'll probably see a lot of creative measures implemented to try to prevent people from dumping their Chachos. And I predict this is going to end where this province, La Rioja, they're just going to run out of pesos because the pesos are going to leave the province and they're going to end up with nothing but worthless Chachos, and it's only going to make their own people poorer.
Wow.
You know what question I'm asking is, like, how scared do you think the people are?
Oh, I can't imagine. I mean, guys, we've here in the States, I can only go by my own experience, and it sucked the last few years watching the price of everything rise by, in my opinion, about 30% on average, right? Some things have doubled. And just that over several years. I mean, Argentina, they doubled the money supply on a monthly basis for a while there. Inflation was over several 100%. And in some cases, they had high double-digit inflation on a monthly basis. On a monthly basis. You can't function in that economy. I mean, it's the wheelbarrow economy, like Melody said. You just, as soon as you earn your money, hurry up and spend it before it loses its value. It's the crack up boom.
And the desperation. Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say, Melody. I mean, the devaluation, I get all that, but it could be a sign of desperation and for the states to try to help the people to avoid riots, or it's just a messed up situation. Humanity has got some work to do, I think.
It also leads to just societal mayhem. I mean, the Weimar inflation in Germany of the 1920s was a direct contributor to the rise of the Nazis. And
that's right.
Of course, history follows and everything that happened there. I mean, entire civilizations go nuts when the currency hyperinflates. People literally lose their minds en masse. And, if they're not careful, that's what's going to happen in Argentina. So, I really hope Milei is successful. I think there's a lot of people in our financial system who are watching Argentina and hoping he fails because, we finally got it. We finally got one place where a libertarian is in charge and we can experiment and see what happens. And if they're successful, then there's going to be a tendency for other countries to want to repeat on that success. And so I think there's a lot of people. That's why I was surprised by the strong language in Bloomberg. I think Bloomberg is one of those outlets that's secretly hoping Milei fails so they can say, see, don't ever try this again.
And we already have history, though. I mean, like, we have literally, 1,000 years of what happens with greed, corruption, fraud, not taking care of the citizens. It all comes crashing down every single time. So it's like, it's something else needs to happen. I feel like something needs to change with holding people accountable with human emotion. Greed, corruption, fraud, ego, selfishness. I mean, you can't have people at the very top of the chain making laws and enforcement that are corrupt, because trickles downward. If the very top is where the corruption is coming from, that's what my point is with the Fed and RealPage. That corruption just, in my opinion, it just spread into RealPage because that's what the Fed created. They created an environment like that. So just keep my eyes open, Melody.
You ready?
Yeah, I think we're all done. You want to take us away, Mel?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. We got another one, don't we?
Yeah. One more story. Yeah. So, okay. So, this story came out this morning in the Wall Street Journal and is by the editorial board. So this is a political story, though, guys. Just you can tell they definitely have an angle here, but the information is very important. And so, the Biden-Harris subprime bank bad loans and guarantees will cost taxpayers $65.2 billion in fiscal 2025. Okay, so guys, this is going to make Jack crazy. Okay, so just going to read a couple of paragraphs from this story. Move over Countrywide Financial of housing panic fame. Washington's new favorite subprime lender is none other than Uncle Sam. It's nice to see the WSJ saying that. Travis, you and I have been saying that for some time. And a little notice report last week make that not notice at all. And we'll look at that report. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that the feds will lose $65.2 billion on risky loans and other credit assistance in the next fiscal year. Federal agencies play by fictional accounting rules under which they don't account for the market risk of their loans. Look, Ma, no defaults. This lets bureaucrats in Congress disguise the cost of their spending. CBO, that's the Congressional Budget Office, thus estimates that Uncle Sam will lose a mere $2.4 billion on loans and loan guarantees issued in the 2025 fiscal year under government accounting standards. So what's important and what this article calls out is that when the government or the administration does its budget, they use this FCRA accounting practice, which is not fair market value. And so in 2014, the Congressional Office came out with this big report that went through and said, looked at all these programs that the administration at the time was claiming didn't cost any money and said, actually, if you look at it and did a fair value calculation, you would see that they were actually losing money. And so what I'm going to do now is going to go over to the most recent report here. Let's see. Because I think this is really, really important. Because I think that I am in this, Travis and I deal with this all the time because we are talking about mortgages. We're talking about, housing. So I want us to, I don't think though, we think about this stuff at the scale that it's really happening. So I just want to go through this real quick. So this is the August 2024 report from the CBO office. The federal government supports some private activities by offering credit assistance to individuals and businesses. That assistance is provided through direct loans and guarantees of loans made by private financial institutions. In this report, the CBO estimates the lifetime cost of new loans and loan guarantees that are projected to be issued in 2025. This is when they go into, you can look at it two ways. One with the FCRA, and then you can do it using the fair value method. And so they say here, one way uses those procedures defined in the FCRA, and the other is based on a measure of fair. Using the FCRA procedures, the standard way in which cost of credit programs are measured in the federal budget, CBO estimates that new loans and loan guarantees issued in 2025 would cost the government $2.4 billion over their lifetime. But if you use the fair value approach, it's going to be $65.2 billion. Okay. And this is important because people have argued for a long time that student loans, these government sponsored backed loans are making money for the government. But more than half of the difference between those amounts is attributable to three sources. And guys, as we go down, you'll see there's over 129 programs that they reviewed. but most of this comes from 3 programs, and that's the guarantees made by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. On a FCRA basis, the federal government says it'll save the government $15.7 billion, but on a fair value basis, they would cost the federal government $0.1 billion. Loans and loans guarantees made by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, which there's been some spicy comments in our comment section on HUD today. On an FCR basis, those programs are projected to save $8.1 billion. On a fair value basis, they would cost $3.1 billion. And then, of course, everybody's favorite punching bag, the student loans. Those programs are projected to cost $16.3 billion on an FCR basis, but will actually cost $22.1 billion. So just want to read this because, again, I want everyone, and when we look at the amount, and I'm about to say it, that the federal government is going to provide in credit access, it is staggering. So, and go and think about what Jack just said about everybody working for the government in Argentina, right? And remember that we were all working for the government during COVID because of those PPP loans. But for this report, CBO analyzed 129 programs through which the federal government provides credit assistance discretionary programs, which are funded through annual appropriation acts. Mandatory, I don't need to read that, but the total amount of federal credit assistance projected for 2025 is $1.9 trillion, consisting of new direct loans that total $220 billion and new guarantees that cover $1.6 trillion in loans. Most federal credit assistance, 86% of the total amount, is provided by the few programs that offer mortgage guarantees and student loans. By far, the largest federal credit programs are the guarantees of mortgage-backed securities provided by the government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Together, those two entities are projected to provide $987 billion in new guarantees in 2025. Okay.
Wow.
I'm good.
You want to go first, Jack, or you? Yeah, you.
Yeah, because I'm chomping at the bit here. $1.9 trillion. All right, in mortgage guarantees and student loan guarantees. Over what time frame was that? Was that 1 year worth of?
That was 1 year. That was 1 year.
So, all right, we wonder, why is housing unaffordable? We wonder, why is college unaffordable? $1.9 trillion the government is making available either through loan guarantees or loans themselves. That 1.9 trillion is out there chasing houses and chasing college tuition, driving up the price of them. We wonder why these things are so expensive. The freaking government is making them so expensive, and they're telling us you're welcome as they do it. What business does the government have being a bank? They suck at everything you do. See the DMV. Why would we think being a bank they'll be better at it? They suck at everything, guys. I'm sorry. You were right. This was going to get me fired up.
Yeah, I mean it's such a huge problem because the reality is that's quantitative easing. They're doing quantitative easing, and the other thing that it makes me realize, Melody, is with those types of $1 trillion losses and $1 billion losses, that's the recession. That's the recession. The private
100%.
The private banks should be absorbing those losses. We would have already entered recession, but Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are the long arm of the Fed, and they're continuing the fraud through the Fed. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, mortgage backs, it all is connected. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is just the long arm of the Fed, and this is some BS. They got a whole quantitative easing, money printing campaign right around the corner. That is some BS. And not good at all. To be honest, that's completely ridiculous to already. I mean, again, it's not their responsibility. If a bank fails, they need to fail. They're keeping alive people that are corrupt, greedy, and failing at their job. Why do they want those people in business? And the other problem is like, well, now we also realize who's really in control of the mortgage market, Melody.
Yeah, and so few people. You can still hear on FinTwit, people will talk about the banks all the time. I'm like, guys, the banks, no. Travis, there's one quote I wanted to read. Could you share my screen really quickly again? This is from the Wall Street Journal article, but this is where they kind of put it in. Future credit losses may even be bigger than CBO projects because the Biden administration is quietly writing down government-backed mortgages to avoid defaults. The Federal Housing Administration has reduced or waived payments on roughly 1.8 million mortgages since 2021, about a quarter of its portfolio. So all these modifications, all this stuff that's happening, all that COVID relief, that's, this is where that money. And so for people to think that somehow these programs don't cost money. And here's the thing, guys, like if our tax receipts continue to go down, there is going to be a political fight, and these programs will not get approved. And now with the Chevron deference overturned, they won't be able to do these end runs around the courts. And so as much as everybody thinks they're going to be writing checks left, right, and center, it's going to take longer, I think, this next time around, precisely because of the overturning of Chevron deference. And so, I think interestingly, right, Jack, your mention of Gavin Newsom's basically saying no to letting immigrants apply for that first-time homebuyer credit. He doesn't have any money. Okay, the money is going to run out, and I know everybody thinks they're going to print and print and print, but to that discussion we just had, the political will is not going to be there because people realize it is not benefiting them. And so the 80% are going to show up and say no. I mean, and so I think that, this is a really good example of they've hit their limit. I mean, they have now completely interfered in this market to such a degree. Before it was private that, kind of made some really bad decisions and ended up with the subprime crisis. But in reality, when you look at the subprime crisis and you dive into it, it wasn't really a big deal. To be honest with you, it was so funny when my last Substack that I wrote, I went back to look at slides from my company that I had put together or helped put together. And in Q4 of 2006, our subprime portfolio was only 17% of our overall book. By the time, the whole crisis was over, the distress, as we saw, was in that prime book. It was in that prime borrower book. And honestly, what caused my company to go into bankruptcy had nothing to do with subprime. It was we went all in on these FHA mortgages, because you get a higher upfront spread when you deliver these to Ginnie Mae. And so everybody in the mortgage market thought that's the way to go. The government game is the only game in town. So we're gonna get on. My CEO was like, we're doing that. And that was in 2009. And guys, we filed bankruptcy by 2012 because the government doesn't pay those claims either. The government's the government, like Jack is talking about, the DMV. That I managed a claims department, and you would have claims that were aging 3 years, sometimes longer. It would take you forever to get your money back, which is another reason I was so annoyed to see Chase say on their delinquency numbers, they exclude Ginnie Mae because it's government guaranteed. They know that's a joke. What they won't talk about is the claim payout rate. So sorry, this was my rant. But this just shows you the scale of government involvement in our lives. And so for people, again, I just think people are they don't realize this. They really don't. And that government has made housing unaffordable, not the banks, not the realtors. I mean, yes, they participate in the system, but the cause is from this government involvement.
And we know, Melody, that there is collusion because of the CFPB report. A CFPB report came out in 2018 that uncovered massive errors with automated underwriting. And
that's right.
16% of those loans in 2018 that were ran through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac automated underwriting were found in violation of the thresholds required for debt to income ratio, which is measuring your ability to pay back that loan. It's the law that was one of the laws and regulations that was passed through the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform.
Yeah, it took the teeth out of that law completely.
But in the collusion is, okay, you have this report, they release it to the public, but instead of holding these people accountable, fining them like you would think, okay, you put these guys at risk, you made money off of them, we're going to fine you, we're going to take things away. Instead of doing that, they colluded instead and just changed the guidelines to cover up what was really going on, which was a huge violation this entire time.
And in my
So
opinion,
colluding.
Travis, had Chevron been overturned, then they wouldn't have gotten away with it. They absolutely wouldn't. They would have had to get legislation to change it. And so this is why I think things are going to be different. Now, they'll always be sneaky and figure out in runs and things like that, but it's going to take longer. So I think people are underestimating the importance of that decision, and it'll be used for bad things as well. Don't get me wrong. That's the way it goes. But that decision is really a landmark case that I think is going to change the way that they can respond to some of these things. So it's going to be very interesting, in my opinion. But I agree, Travis, like they essentially what in that CFPB report they found is that Dodd-Frank didn't work.
Because they were allowed, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were purchasing the loans, though they could have stopped it, is my point.
Well, but they don't want. They want the juice. They want the money. That's why Freddie came out and said, let's do close-in seconds, even though we saw the destruction that caused. They don't care. They want that juice coming in because that covers up all of the other losses. Fannie and Freddie still get nowhere close to their capital requirements, but they still make a lot of money. They always figure out how to make their money. So
yeah, and they allow the fraud. I got a couple comments. No, that was so good. Dang it, Melody. Now I'm frustrated. But anyway, but again, the awareness, like I can't believe they're already working on it. MNJ, don't forget to hit subscribe, get all of the doom. MNJ, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you also, MNJ, for your services as a Blue Wrench, as a moderator, keeping things neat and tidy in the chat.
Thank you so much.
That very much, MNJ. Also, thank you, our girl Nan. Thank you also for what you do.
Awesome.
If I can, Jack, real quick, before I get into Real Estate Watchman, I wanted to pull up one comment that I think was especially appropriate for potentially a roundtable discussion. I want to get to Real Estate Watchman, but I thought this comment was so important. It's from Chris again. Chris, how you doing, buddy? Hope all is well, my friend. This is such a good question. It's such a good question because then it asks the question, do you want to be a part of the problem or not to survive? Right? The question is, what do you think of Joe Brown's advice? If you want to make real change, this is so good. If you want to make real change, you often have to accept the current reality. So far, I agree. Take advantage of it. So far, I agree. And build yourself up to a position where you can make a difference. I agree with those things, but I believe what he's saying is, and specifying is we have to learn a way to be part of the system, to make money off of it so that we're hedged properly. Some people would say, then you're just part of the problem. You're part of the corruption. You're part of the greed. You got to take a step back if you want real change, right? Then the other thought is, well, I don't want to be like those sheep, right? I want to make money. I want to survive for my family. I want to be smart. I want to be intelligent. Where are you guys at with that?
I think you got to operate within the world that we live in, right? And it does suck. I do wish it was a different way, but I agree with what Joe is saying here. And, powerless people cannot change things. So if you operate from a standpoint of how you wish the world was and not how the world is, then you are going to be taken advantage of, trampled over, beaten down, broken, and you will have no power and no ability to affect change. And so I agree with Joe's sentiment here. It kind of sucks, but it's accurate.
I think I agree a lot. But the last statement, I think, honestly, guys, I think we can all affect change. We have so much more agency than we think we do. And I'm sure that, when he said build yourself up to a position where we can make a difference, I'm probably reading that too literally, but I think we can make a difference from almost any position when we accept our reality.
Yeah, it's just there's so many ways you could take this comment and so much to share. For me personally, just to go off of what Jack was saying, because I agree with him, and that's why personally I feel like that's why it takes someone to say no. that can afford to, that's strong enough not to get beat up from the system. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's why these things I'm doing is for free. I can afford to do that. I'm strong enough to know, hey, the system's going to come at me. And I'm smart enough to know that if I stop working right now, Melody, Jack, the officials will come into this apartment here or where I'm renting, and they will kick me out and throw me out in the street. So I get it. I get it. And it goes back to what you guys were both saying. It's just the way of the world. But I still think there needs to be more people that say we're going to make a difference a different way. We're going to make a difference by changing the system, not continuing the existing fraud and continuing the existing problem. But this is such a great concept right here. Good job, Chris. Anything else, guys?
I
Jack,
think
go
there
ahead,
was
man.
another one from Real Estate Watchman that we missed.
Yep. Right.
There,
here, buddy.
there he is. My first PPP, your payroll protection program, effect on housing vid coming soon. Okay,
Yeah,
looking
wait.
for that one, Real Estate Watchman. Check out Ari Watchman's channel on YouTube, by the way. He's been a guest on the Doomers News Network before. He's a fellow honorary Doomer. In one smaller Florida county, 5 car dealer owners bought beachfront homes under business address shortly after getting $500,000 to $2 million in payroll protection program money. Rich welfare. Real Estate Watchman, that is awesome. What a data point. And let me I don't know if you finished making this video yet or not, or if it's still a work in progress, but pull a thread on an outfit called Cross River Bank from Teaneck, New Jersey. When you're doing this, they're also, I think they moved their headquarters to Fort Lee, New Jersey. It's called Cross River Bank. And especially with what they did with PPP, they will blow your mind how many loans that little bank issued. Looking forward to that one, Ari Watchman. And thank you very much for supporting the channel.
Can't
Thank you, brother.
wait for that. But you just a quick for perspective, a lot of people are very angry, and I think all of us would agree that the student loan forgiveness program is not a good use of our federal dollars. However, $42 billion, I think, is the final price tag on that. That's how much fraud they know about in PPP. And so, it's just the unfairness of it all. It's just so crazy. And the fact that those loans were forgiven. And so, just keep that in mind. I'm not saying that student loans should be forgiven, but the fact is that a lot of those people that do have them are kind of younger, and they're not going to get a free ride like the people who took the PPP loans did.
Melody, I think I got a good roundtable question right here. And by the way, just for the kids, it took me till I was 40 years old to grow up. And guess what? I'm 40 years old right now. So do the math there. Got a comment here. I think this is great potential discussion here, especially between you and Jack. And Jack, if you can lead the discussion on this, so much printing, we hear you think so as well, Jack. There's going to be 0% interest rates, more. So does Melody. There will be more printing. But there's a point where it's already at that point where it's parabolic. I mean, technically, I'll say we're there now. We can't make it 2 years without some type of stimulus and without going into depression. But talk about this, Jack. Talk about the overstimulus. What happens if stimulus fails like it did in China?
I mean, I think the only thing that would be worse than stimulus failing would be stimulus succeeding. So stimulus, the very nature of it is failure. The government is artificially juicing the economy by siphoning money out of it and then picking and choosing winners. So there is no such thing as a successful stimulus. Just the very nature of it is failure in and of itself. And, that's the one common criticism I see in Western media is every time there's an article about something going wrong in China and the housing market, especially Bloomberg, they're pretty big with that. They always talk about how China's stimulus measures so far have been inadequate and China is resisting doing bigger stimulus. They're taking it as a given that they are going to print quadrillions of yuan and pump it into the economy because that, to a hammer, everything looks like nails. To Bloomberg economists, everything looks like a problem that can be solved by money printing. But what if, just a crazy what if China doesn't turn on the fire hose and bazooka stimulus in? And, it'll be painful, but what if it works? What if it works better than all of our stupid stimulus measures here? It'll be a sad day in hell, or a cold day in hell, or a sad day in America. I don't know, whatever you want to say. if the Chinese Communist Party adapts a more fundamentally sound economic policy and doesn't bazooka stimulus in, and they are successful, what's that going to say about us and all of our government overreach and monetary debasement?
Maybe it'll look like, oh my gosh, wait, this is right now. Holy moly, wait. This is as of right now. This is the national debt as a percentage of GDP. So again, people just keep printing, huh? Just keep printing. You guys see this chart right there on the screen? That's what it's looking like when we keep printing. And now my children are bankrupt. Now I can barely survive. I can't thrive anymore. As a result of that chart you're looking at, we should all be thriving right now. All of us should be thriving, but very small percentage of us is thriving. Melody, I have a super good question for you if you're interested.
Sure.
This one's for Melody, Jack. All right. I thought this would be right up your alley. From RR, thank you for your participation. Very great comments, sir. Thank you for moving on the community and growing. The Fed was created for one reason, to protect its members' banks. All the other BS about dual mandates is pure nonsense, like price control, limited unemployment things. Do you agree with this statement, Melody? Do you want to?
We live in a time of performance. I mean, where things just aren't real anymore in terms of, and so, and what I mean by that is we're all watching the Fed perform every single day. And in reality, they don't have control. And I think, in essence, the banks, although we think that the Fed kind of bullies the banks, I honestly think it is the other way around. And I think the Fed has has really never had control, but they're very good actors and performers. And that's what they're doing right now. And so that means because there's nothing there, they can change their mandates. They can they can act illegally, they can buy MBS or whatever. But yeah, they're not there to protect us. They're not there to help us. I mean, guys, just step back and think, what ridiculousness. Why would we let a man stand up and say we're going to make sure that there's fewer jobs? That's our policy. And we want to make sure your prices are increasing by 2% that we tell you about. So why would anyone think those guys are good guys? Sorry, Trav, I know you did, but
no, it makes me so upset. I just want people to be aware. Because I know if enough people are aware, then we can make change. It's it's a double-edged sword. We have the corruption and greed, but then we have a lack of people that are willing to step up. I have a good one for you, Jack. I think you're going to like for your discussion. Maybe you guys are nailing this. This is from David. This is good. Recessions are unavoidable and necessary to reallocate labor and capital. Delaying them only creates massive problems. Jack? Go ahead, man.
That's what I got. Look, David Stewart, a man after my own Austrian heart. Abso-freaking-lutely. This is why I embrace the Austrian business cycle, the boom-bust cycle. Recessions are the natural result of economic phenomenon. You get credit expansion leads to periods of economic prosperity and economic growth. But that economic growth ultimately leads to malinvestment, and the cheap capital from the credit expansion leads to malinvestment, and that malinvestment is wasteful, and it leads to recessions where credit gets scarce and money gets scarce again, and there is losses of jobs and entire industries come and go. It's very similar to the cycle in biology and in nature, where if a species is too successful, it becomes a victim of its own success. It overconsumes the food supply, and there's a die-off or disease comes in. Business is no different, right? Nature is how life competes for scarce resources and allocates energy and efficiency based on that. Business operates the same way. When governments or Keynesian economists or modern monetary theorists try to intervene and try to rig the system, much like in nature, when there's some extraneous force that comes in and messes with the natural balance of things, you get mass die-offs, and it gets even worse. So I 100% emphatically agree, David Stewart. I believe recessions are unavoidable. The theory of Keynesianism that the government can step in and pick up government spending at any time to prevent recession from happening, I think it's dangerous, and it leads to inevitably worse crises and worse recessions. So thank you very much, David Stewart.
Gosh, that's so good, Jack. I love listening to you guys talk. If it's okay, Melody, I have at least one more for you, Melody. These are such great comments right here. I mean, my goodness. So here's our comment. Hopefully you can discuss this. My only pushback, and he's got such a good point here. My only pushback for PPP fraud is that the government forced companies to go bankrupt. Millions of students were not forced into loans they could never repay. I think it's important because that was what I was trying to explain before, where what if it's really the Fed that's creating these situations? And the only way to take advantage of these situations, not to go bankrupt, is to commit the fraud, or at least there's a push. Can you go into this, Melody? I thought it would be right up your alley.
Yeah, so I'm going at some point. I'm going to be writing a book about economic intervention and the arc of my life, because when the farm loans were called in the 80s, that's when my family got into a lot of trouble. We lost our house to foreclosure, things like that. So I was one of these useful idiots that took out student loans, and I'm not saying I don't want to pay them back. I absolutely pay them back. I'm still paying them, believe it or not. And I would say that I didn't have a lot of options. What I wish I had done is known someone who was smart about finances to tell me, listen, just go to a community college, do this, because I worked full time throughout my entire college career, in undergrad and graduate school. In undergrad, I had 3 jobs, but I still needed those loans to pay for tuition. But if someone had just been there to counsel me and say, hey, listen, this doesn't make good financial sense. Instead, what they did is sign here. And by the way, here's your credit card application at the same table. Okay. And so in many ways, everything in our society is about pushing people to get better jobs so they can spend more money. And so that is what I thought I had to do. I thought I had to go to a certain type of college. Somebody mentioned it in the comments, the $300,000 English degree. I have some sympathy for that. And I thought I was going to teach college. And they told me the only way I was going to be able to teach college is if I went to one of these great schools like NYU, which, $30,000 a year, insanity, that kind of thing. And I bought it hook, line, and sinker. And so, I think that I think what he's saying it is absolutely true, that people were forced to shut down their businesses. That is true. But I think, you can also feel sorry for all of us who have grown up in a society where we are being pushed to do really stupid things and this is why I say all the time, just say no to debt slavery, because that's what my life became, was enslaved to that debt. And meanwhile, I was doing things like using credit cards to live. So had they not pushed those applications on me, an 18-year-old with no financial education, I probably wouldn't have signed those documents. And so I think awareness, so I do agree with the point to some degree, but I think we're all being pushed in our society to do these really detrimental things, and we should have some empathy for folks that, like myself, who made really bad decisions. But I plan, I'm paying back my debt. Like I know that's what I owe. I'm not asking for it to be forgiven.
Very good. Very good. Jack, if you could maybe respond to this last comment from Charlie here, and then maybe Melody can get us.
Well, I would just respond by saying thank you so much, Charlie B. Appreciate the super chat support of the Doomers News Network. Thank you very much, sir. Also appreciate the good vibes. More people have to wake up. I agree. We're hoping to affect a little change here with this channel, right? Knowledge is power. Our education system does not teach the basics of finance. And so the elites that are doing these many things to us that we talked about today, they are dependent on financial illiteracy to continue doing what they're doing. So educating yourself is the best defense against that, the best way to stop them from doing it. We're hoping to do that with this channel. So thank you for supporting that, Charlie B. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Miss Melody. Take us away, Mel.
Yeah. So Jack, I was just thinking the same thing. I think that's why we're so passionate about this, is that we want to give financial literacy to people, to an education system that has on purpose failed to provide that education, because if we're useful idiots, we're going to continue filling out those credit card applications. We're going to continue taking out mortgages and student loans so that we will be enslaved. And so what we want to do on this channel is to make sure that's not you guys. And we're here for you to teach you. You don't have to buy everything we're saying. And we hope you don't. We hope you challenge it. But what we are trying to do is arm you with the information you need to make the best decisions for your family. So yet again, I mean, the support that we see is just unbelievable. We are so thankful for the community and the platform that you provide to us. So thank you so much for joining us on your weekend and spending time with us here. We will see you again next week. And actually, I think we'll see you before next weekend. So stay tuned for that. But thanks so much for joining, guys. And just please never, ever, 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 ever forget, math actually matters.